Hello and welcome to Myth Monsters. My name is Erin and I'll be your host for these little snack bite-sized podcasts on folklore and mythical monsters from around the world. These podcasts focus on the actual cryptids, folklore and mythic monsters from global mythology, rather than focusing on the full stories of heroes and their big adventures. I'll also be dropping in some references that they have to recent culture, and where you can see these represented in modern day content, so that you can learn more and get as obsessed as I am about these absolute legends of the mythological world. We're back, and I'm terribly glad to be. I had a little trip over to Belfast in Northern Ireland last week, and unfortunately was nowhere near anything particularly folklorish. Although I did have a pint or 5 in the legendary Crown Bar, which is one of the oldest pubs in the UK, and I drunkenly talked about folklore, fairy circles, banshees and giants to a cab driver on the way back to my hotel. So it wasn't all a loss for the podcast, but I can't remember anything you told me. But we're going away from Northern Ireland and the UK this week to the beautiful and vast Central America for a monster that has 2 sides to it, but equally, like myself, loves a bit of the booze. Yes, we are looking at the Cadejo this episode. The Cadejo is generally described as a dual spirit that appears as 2 large dogs, about as big as a cow, but they can choose to be a little bit smaller than this. One of these 2 dogs is described as being pure white, well groomed with bright blue eyes, and an incredibly calm nature, whilst the other is black as tar, with raggedy hair, goat hooves, and bright purple or red glowing eyes. Now they both smell pretty horrendously like goat, urine and sulphur, and they are always seen wearing some kind of chain, either attached to them like a collar and a leash, or as a shackle on one of their legs. The white Cadejo is known to be benevolent, and they would walk alongside travellers during their journeys, keeping them safe from the dark version of itself, which is determined to kill and eat them. This commonly happens with drunks, vagabonds and potentially evil people who are out late, and the Cadejo is designed to be their protector or their ruin, sometimes both at the same time. One of the Black Cadejo's powers is to be able to cause evil and bad decisions in the person, whilst the aim of the White Cadejo's power is to do everything to protect them from this, with the bright light surrounding the person fighting off those impulses and scaring off other humans willing to hurt or rob them whilst they're intoxicated. They have a few other powers, including petrifying those who look at them, leaving them open to the attack from the Black Cadejo. They also had the power to drive you mad if you were to speak to it or turn your back on it, as almost a sign of ungratefulness for not engaging with it. Super size, speed and strength are also general traits to them, be that supernatural or not. I suppose they are gigantic dogs, I guess they're super muscly. These dogs though are from Central America, which includes Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Costa Rica and Nicaragua, where this monster is most commonly found. They only travel at night and are known to walk immensely fast through the wilderness, working in a kind of yin and yang kind of partnership of good and evil. They both tend to hang around graveyards and dark alleyways in these countries, ready to pounce or save the person coming out of the bar. There have been a few instances where the Black Cadejo are found on their own, with no White Cadejo in sight, meaning the person they hunt is pretty much on their own in this. Basically, if the Cadejo is after you, your only hope is the White Cadejo, otherwise you will not survive. Some people say that praying might help, but you're also not meant to walk with your legs open around it, as if they run through them, they'll steal your soul, and that's white or black. However, the Black Cadejo is one that people tend to focus on, and has a couple of other interpretations within this myth. The first is that it's the devil incarnate, who appears as this wounded dog with hooved feet, and because of this, the White Cadejo is completely unable to stop any attack, because technically they're not working in a partnership. It is almost like a demonic possession. However, this one doesn't typically attack. It acts more as like an omen of a tragic event and the eyes of evil. If you are to see this, it is doomed that you are to have a tragic event in your life, so it's one that you would typically steer away from, and one that you would usually find on its own. The second is more of a luring predator. It will emit a series of sounds, sometimes including the calls of family members or terrified screams. The victim would investigate, terrified themselves, and the dog would pounce and tear apart the victim if the white Cadejo didn't make it in time to protect him. The last is actually the offspring of the Cadejo and a normal dog. These ones don't bite the victim like its parent, but will kick and peck at them with their snout instead, which would drive the victim mad over time. There's a saying about these people, lo jugó el Cadejo, which means they were handled by a Cadejo, and unfortunately, this was also used to describe someone who was born with a mental illness within these spaces in this time. You can actually kill this one by just smacking it with a machete, but it is a difficult monster. They are still very strong and very stealthy, and it's difficult to take out with normal means. So this is kind of an absolute human feat. Once any Cadejo is killed though, within seconds of death, the body would rot into the floor, where the stain would mean that the grass or any other kind of life would never grow there again. It was almost tainted with the evil. Just to add to that whole evil and good of these monsters, we know that the Black Cadejo's favourite treat was newborn babies, and typically older people. But the White Cadejos love these bell-like flowers that grow on the side of volcanoes. And actually, these creatures are very often linked to volcano myths as well within these places. We do assume that they reproduce in the normal dog kind of way, and that there are multiple Cadejos throughout Central America. But we're not really sure how the normal Cadejos die, these more spiritual animals, rather than their offspring that are half mortal. We're not sure, but we know that they do thanks to this melt-away phenomenon. But let's hop on over to etymology, where we actually have two possible origins for this word. The word Cadejo is Spanish, of course, with a very soft J, I'm not saying Cadejo, and it is believed to be derived from cadena, which means chain, relating to the chain that they always have attached to them. The other is that it may be linked to a large weasel family called the Cadejo, but we're not sure which one is correct. I'm going to assume it's the first one. It sounds better, and I think the idea of that infernal chain linking them together, but also to this almost hellhound-like structure of myth, is great. In regards to their history, there's not very much on this one, I'm afraid. We have no idea when they came into history or folklore. However, we do think that they are really ancient and have been passed down through word of mouth. There is a legend that the Cadejo is a result of an ancient Mesoamerican belief that humans are all linked to having one pet in their lives, and they act as a guardian angel for their linked human. Now, when I say Mesoamerica, you might not know what this means, so I will quickly explain it. I mean generally the southern part of the continent of North America. Interestingly, this was a load of different civilizations mixed into a boiling pot, and before the Spanish colonisation in 1493, it was mostly made up of indigenous groups. We do also have a heavy Aztec influence in this part of the world, and some of the first ever written languages. However, myths and legends were still mostly spread through word of mouth thanks to an indigenous/tribal culture. What we do have though is a couple of stories and sightings about the Cadejo from the last 300 years though, which does give us something to go off of in terms of history. One of the best legends is that two brothers in El Salvador were going to see a black magician. He asked the boys to help him find some logs for his fire during a storm, but both boys just sit there and eat the man's food greedily. Once the magician had seen that all of his food was gone and there was no firewood, he put a curse on the road leading back to the boys' village. Eventually, they leave the house, and when they do, they hear voices on that same cursed road. And then they turn their back on them to see where they're coming from. Immediately, the two boys turn into the white and black Cadejo and are forced to wander the rest of their lives. Another one of these stories is from around the 1900s, from what I could find, when a man called Juan Carlos and his family lived in Guatemala. He lived as a guardian in the local town and would arrive at his house at midnight from a shift, whilst his wife and children worked at home alone in the fields. One day, Juan found a white dog when he came home, but it was really startled by him and ran away. He would keep trying to follow the dog every night, and eventually, the dog didn't move and let him touch his paw. All of a sudden, the dog opened his eyes wider and said, "You do not need my help anymore." "What help?" Juan responded. The dog replied, "I am a dog sent from above. My mission was to protect you from danger, but you have shown me you do not need my help anymore." And then the dog died in his arms, and Juan buried him and honoured him every time he came home from then on as his protector. I think that one's lovely. The Cadejo is often linked to some other mythical monsters in Central American mythos, and they are actually very much intertwined. They are said to be protectors from two, probably even worse monsters that would kill people. These are the Cipito and the Segua. The Cipito is described as an 8 to 10-year-old boy that would tempt people into the woods using their backwards facing feet. The Segua is described as a shape-shifting creature that lures men into danger using their beauty, only to reveal the face of a horse or skull, driving the person mad. Both of these monsters work generally in harmony with the Black Cadejo, with the Cipito and the Segua luring people into the wilderness, only to be eaten by a lone Cadejo once they are alone and or mad. I'll probably cover both of these monsters separately, but it's really interesting to kind of have these pairings really come through in all of these different mythoses. For other monsters they're related to throughout world folklore, for me, they really remind me of hellhounds, which are dogs generally sent from hell to obey the orders of the devil. These are typically black, large dogs, and they are from loads of mythologies across the world, the most famous technically being Cerberus of Greek myth, acting as the three-headed protector of the underworld, but also as a fearsome predator and opponent, even for a demigod. We also have the black dog from British folklore, an omen of death for anyone who sees it, but without having much actual supernatural power. They were just black dogs that got blamed for curses, like black cats, I suppose. Sirius Black was one of these in Harry Potter, and the whole Prisoner of Azkaban story is intertwined with the black dog myth being the omen of misfortune throughout this book. What I think is really interesting about the Cadejo is the balance that it represents. The good versus evil, dark versus light, yin versus yang, and black versus white. That there is a protector looking after you from the evil of the outside, and sometimes that evil that gets inside as well. I think this makes this monster so much more interesting. And we also have the issue with the victims of the Cadejo. Drunken bar visitors on their way home, where evil can potentially be lurking around the corner ready to get you, and you would need that guardian to make it home safe. However, are these drunken illusions and plays on stories that they've heard growing up? Who knows? It's definitely a good concept, and that they're in the shape of loyal dogs to look after their respective owner is pretty good.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men?
Turn your dial to find the frequency of the past.
Captain Advance.
Where the classic stories of mysteries, sci-fi, thrillers, and suspense are found waiting to be heard once again.
Another case for Nick Carter, Master Detective.
You'll find a variety of those stories here, in their original form, where each episode takes you to another place or time.
The Man of Bronze, Doc Savage.
But only when you find the mystery frequency. Available everywhere.
The Shadow knows.
Now, let's hop on over to modern media. We kind of have to look at their closest comparison for this one, and that, for me, I believe is the Hellhound, which are mentioned a lot more in the media than the Cadejo themselves. For art though, I'd really recommend just one artist this week, and that's Carlos Loarca, who has painted so many pictures of the Cadejo as he believed that the spirit protected his father when he was a child, and felt that it also helped him recover from his addiction to alcohol. His paintings of them are beautiful, and so different from normal portrait art I recommend. They're very, very abstract, so please do go and check them out, I really recommend it. And of course, there are always some really cool independent artworks for these type of monsters, so go and support your local ones too. In movies, we have All Dogs Go to Heaven, Hercules, Scoob, Where the Dead Go to Die, The Lost Boys, Scooby-Doo, Wishmaster, The Never-Ending Story, Jonah Hex, Hellboy, The Chronicles of Riddick, The Bye-Bye Man, Ghostbusters, Dark Angel The Ascent, Predators, Never Cry Werewolf, Black Dog, and An American Haunting. For TV, we have Mystery Science Theatre 3000, Two Stupid Dogs, The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, The Owl House, Phineas and Ferb, League of Super Evil, Fangbone, Mr. Pickles, Hell of a Boss, Has Been Hotel, Teen Wolf, What We Do in the Shadows, Rescue Me, Kolchak the Night Stalker, Reaper, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Ultraman Nexus, Supernatural, Chrono Crusade, Black Butler, Digimon, One Piece, Naruto, Hellsing, and Berserk. In video games, we have ones such as Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy, Apocalypse, Total War Warhammer, Smite, RuneScape, Quest 64, Penumbra, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, Devil May Cry, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Nightmare Creatures, Monster Hunter, Dungeon Keeper, Shadowgate, League of Legends, Deadly Premonition, Kingdom Hearts 2, Heroes of Might and Magic, Odin Sphere, Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones, Pokemon, The Elder Scrolls, Dragon's Crown, Shadow Hearts, Doom Eternal, Fallout 4, Secret of Mana, Bounty of One, Polly Polly Speed Daisakusen, and Age of Wonders. My book recommendations this week are for Warriors, Gods and Spirits from Central and South American Mythology by Douglas Gifford, for more about this part of the world and their mythos. But for you horror short story fans, have a look at Our Shadows Have Claws, 15 Latin American monster stories by various authors for some spooky stories about these very real monsters. And lastly, for kids, have a look at Magic Dogs of the Volcanoes by Manlio Argueta for a lovely story about the Cadejo in a much better and child-friendly light. But now it's time for Do I Think They Existed? This one is really interesting in regards to this question because they are spirits, so it automatically makes them a little bit more up in the air in terms of believability anyway. But I also think they could be this idea of a personified guardian angel against the ominous invisible dark, especially when you're really drunk. The other interesting part of this is that this monster targets drunk people and non-natives, which maybe can't get across or understand what they're seeing and can't explain it to others whilst they either can't speak the language or are just too drunk to know what they're even saying. And of course, their believability then is considerably reduced. Also, we do have to take into account that street dogs are more common in this part of the world, and they are more commonly found in the late night, as well as being really aggressive around their food sources. So whilst I'm not saying 100% they're definitely mistaken street dogs seen by drunk people in the middle of the night, it seems quite likely. So I'm probably going to say no for this one, I'm afraid. However, please don't mistake me, I love this monster. I love the idea of the dark and the light version of the Cadejo, and that one that will protect you, but the other one is actively seeking to murder you at all times. It really reminds me of Kindred, who is a champion from League of Legends if you've ever played it, who has a lamb main character, but this dark wolf spirit on her shoulder ready to pounce, and they act like a tag team, working together in the perfect harmony of darkness versus light and good versus evil. I think that inherently is so interesting and pretty cool, right? But what do you think? Did the Cadejo stalk the drunkards of Central America? Let me know on Twitter, I would love to know what you think about this one. I thought it was a really fun monster, and definitely an interesting concept for this good and evil spirit rolled into one. And it is definitely a first for the podcast to have this yin and yang kind of monster. I definitely know which one I want to walk into on a late night out drinking though. Next week, we are heading over to ancient Egypt for one of the very rare monsters from this civilization. Is he even a monster, or is he a god? Find out with me for the slippery serpent Apep next Thursday. For now though, thank you so much for listening, it's been an absolute pleasure. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give it a rating on the service you are listening on. I've got the Twitter for any questions or suggestions on what monsters to cover next, and I'd really love to hear from you. The social media handles for TikTok, YouTube, Threads and Instagram are Myth Monsters Podcast, and the Twitter is Myth Monsters Pod. But all of our content can be found at mythmonsters.co.uk, including some very cool merchandise. And you can find us on Good Pods, Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon if you want to help me fund the podcast too. Come join the fun though, share this with your pals, they might love me as much as you do. But for now, stay spooky, and I'll see you later babes.